It looks like we're heading for a minority government in the next parliamentary term. The coalition consistently leads the ALP in the primary vote. However, the coalition still only scores about 36% of that primary vote, meaning that the ALP ties it after preferences. And since we know that the Greens will pick up some seats, as will the Teals, it is likely that the ALP will still form a minority government with the support of the Teals and the support of the Greens. Now, if we look at how this maps out, well, there are 151 seats in Parliament. It takes 76 seats to form a majority government. According to Redbridge, the coalition is set to gain 6 seats over its current standing, taking it to 59 seats. Labour is set to retain 64 seats. The Greens will retain 3 seats, the Teals will retain 9, and Dai Li might retain her seat. 14 seats are too close to call. This overall suggests that the ALP is likely to form a minority government in the next session of Parliament, and the coalition is very unlikely to form government. This, of course, is going to be a bad result, because the ALP is going to need to adopt policies from the Teals or the Greens in order for it to get anything done. And we can see just a couple of examples to see how this might pan out. For example, Jim Chalmers is reportedly considering making discussions with the Greens about reforming the RBA board. This effectively means that the ALP and the Greens are going to try to find ways to stack the RBA board with their own friends, with their apparatchiks, effectively taking control of the RBA, effectively undermining all of the hard work the RBA is trying to do to offset the bad policies of the government. The Greens as well are already trying to extract environmental concessions from the ALP. The Greens, it appears, would hold up the government and force them to make more concessions to the Greens in order for the government to get anything done. The ALP forming a coalition with the Greens is a recipe for disaster. But let's make no mistake, the Teals also have some very left-leaning policies and appear in many cases to be very similar to the Greens. That is, the ALP is effectively going to be having to shift toward more of a Greens-type coalition for it to actually govern in the next parliamentary term, and this ultimately harms us all, because the ALP is not getting a majority vote. Furthermore, none of these independents or the Teals are getting majority either. This suggests that a coalition of various different minority constituents are going to be able to overrule the plurality of the voters. This could be a bad outcome, and it's not entirely clear that even Labour voters will want the Greens' policies, because I dare say that many of the Greens' policies are far too extreme for many Labour voters. However, it looks like that is likely what is going to happen in the next session of Parliament. Now, to get a better understanding of this, we can also look at some of the splits and some of the factors influencing voters' decisions, as reported by Redbridge in the most recent poll. The one that was most interesting to me is the question: has the federal government, led by Anthony Albanese, done anything since being elected that has made life better? 57% of people say no. Only 24% of people say yes. That is a truly catastrophically bad result for Anthony Albanese. Now, that doesn't mean that people are going to switch toward Peter Dutton. However, simply voting for him because you believe the other guy is bad is not exactly a compelling narrative. More worryingly for the ALP, this is consistent across all age groups. Even if the younger 18 to 34-year-old age group, the ALP is not gaining traction. Here, 59% of people say that the ALP has not done anything to make life better. Only 15% of people say that it has done something to make life better. That is a truly bad result for the ALP, given they are trying to pick up votes in that age group. One wonders whether that age group might defect to the Greens rather than the ALP, which of course is not going to be a good result either. That result is also consistent across gender splits. 58% of women and 55% of men said the ALP has not done anything to make life better after being elected. They are not picking up much support, therefore, across any of these splits. If you look at who voters believe is the better economic manager, well, here it's tied between Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. In essence, voters don't have confidence in either of the leaders to do a particularly good job. Because you will note that only 62% of people believe that either of the two leaders is actually going to be better than one of the other. 10% of voters believe that they are the same, and then you've got a sizable portion, 28%, that either are not sure or don't believe either is the better economic manager. That is, 20% of people seem to believe they are both terrible, which itself is slightly telling. However, this is not really good for either Anthony Albanese or Peter Dutton, because if Peter Dutton wants to win on the economy, well, he needs to show that he is the better economic manager than Anthony Albanese. Now, to my mind, Jim Chalmers, who is the treasurer, is truly catastrophically bad as a treasurer. He's brought in policies that make things worse, policies that are actively inflationary. The Future Made in Australia policy, which is a euphemism if ever I heard one, will make inflation worse. The industrial relations laws, which seems to clamp down on flexibility and the ability to pay workers more for working better, working harder, or producing more outputs, that also undermines productivity. The subsidies do not improve inflation because, as I've talked about ad nauseum in prior videos, they do nothing to address the underlying growth rate in the particular thing. For example, they don't change the month-on-month or the quarter-on-quarter growth rate. They are a one-off decrement that reverses in 12 months' time, which conveniently for the ALP will be after the election, hoping that people don't notice. In essence, the ALP has been a terrible economic manager. Their policies are inflationary, undermine productivity, and undermine ambition. This isn't to say that Peter Dutton's policies are perfect, just that the ALP is in government and they have done a bad job. Ridgeridge also asked voters to respond to several different questions or comments about the leaders. For example, they asked voters, who best understands the worries and concerns of people like you? And then asked them whether Anthony Albanese or Peter Dutton, etc., best understood their worries. Here, 25% of people thought Anthony Albanese did, and only 23% of people thought Peter Dutton did. 42% of people thought that neither leader understood their worries. And that should be troubling for both parties here, because it tells us that voters aren't particularly confident that either leader is going to do a very good job. They also asked which leader is most on your side. 27% of people said Anthony Albanese, 26% of people said Peter Dutton, 36% of people said neither. Think on that. 36% of voters believe that neither leader is on their side. That is truly troubling and truly appalling on the behalf of both leaders here. When asked whether the leaders say what they believe in, 25% of people say Anthony Albanese does, 25% of people say Peter Dutton does, and 37% of people think that neither politician says what they believe in. In essence, 37% of voters seem to believe that the politicians are lying to them. I have a lot of sympathy with that viewpoint. And then finally they asked, which leader will fight for people like you? 25% of people said Anthony Albanese, 23% of people said Peter Dutton, and 41% of people said neither. The main thing to get out of this is that Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton are more or less tied in this particular question group. Sometimes Anthony Albanese is leading by 1 point, but I dare say that's not enough to really shift the needle. The bigger thing here is the lack of confidence in either leader. People don't like Anthony Albanese, they don't like Peter Dutton, and they're just voting for who they dislike the least. They're voting for the least bad outcome. It is therefore little wonder that actually some of the other minor parties, or the Teals, for example, are picking up some votes. Because if people don't like Peter Dutton and don't like Anthony Albanese, they might look for an alternative. The one might wonder whether this is an opportunity for parties like One Nation, which have had a lot of cut-through on many of the core messages voters are actually concerned about. But circling back around to the premise of this video, it looks like we are going to be stuck with a minority government. It looks like Anthony Albanese and Labour are going to be forced even further to the left by having to align with, effectively form a coalition with, the Greens. It looks like this is going to make Australia worse. Nevertheless, let me know your thoughts about the polling in the comments below. Do you think either leader actually cares about you or says what they believe in? Or do you think they're both pretty bad? Let me know what you think.